Have you noticed how monster culture has just exploded in the wellness world? I mean, everywhere you look, people are claiming their villain eras or talking about the energy vampires in their life. We're taking these ancient myths and using them to figure ourselves out. And that brings up a really fascinating question. Are we just using these stories as, a metaphor for personal growth? Or are they something more like a manual for system failure? I'm sure you've seen this phrase all over social media. I'm in my villain era. And it feels pretty empowering, right? It's like you're taking back some part of yourself you've had to push down. But what are we really saying when we start to identify with the monster? Are we embracing some kind of hidden strength? Or are we just putting a cool name on our own breakdown? So that's the big question here. Is this whole trend just a poetic metaphor? A powerful story we tell ourselves to heal? Or are these ancient myths something much more clinical, almost like technical manuals that describe with shocking precision exactly how our nervous systems break down under stress? So today, we're going to dig into two totally competing ways to understand our inner monsters. On one side, you have what's called spiritual holism, which sees all these myths as powerful stories. And on the other, you have structural holism, which sees them as, well, diagnostic categories for mechanical failures. Okay, so let's break this down. The spiritual view says that myths are basically software for our minds. We use stories to reframe our reality, to integrate our so-called shadow self. It's all about perception. But then you have the structural view, and it argues that, no, these myths are technical manuals. They describe biological failures. And the goal isn't to be a better monster, it's to repair the machine so that the monster state isn't necessary anymore. All right, let's put these two ideas to the test with our first case study, the werewolf. Is this myth really about embracing our wild, repressed nature? Or is it a surprisingly precise description of a very specific kind of system collapse inside the human body? The structural argument kicks off with this idea called continuity failure, which you see a lot in cases of complex PTSD. Okay, imagine your computer can't run all its programs at the same time. Because it's constantly scanning for threats, it has to shut down some programs to power up others. That's basically what this is, a nervous system that can't hold a single, stable identity because it's being forced to switch back and forth between totally different operating modes just to survive. And when you look at it this way, the contrast is just stark. The spiritual view sees the werewolf's duality as this wild shadow self fighting the civilized you. But the structural view says, hang on, it's not two selves, it's one system toggling between a social mode and a survival mode. The transformation isn't your repressed self breaking free, it's what's called a sympathetic storm, a state of such high alert that the rational thinking part of the brain just goes completely offline, leaving nothing but raw instinct. But what about the moon? That's the magical part, right? In the spiritual view, it's this mystical feminine force pulling our truth out. The structural view, though, offers this chillingly mechanical alternative. The moon is not magic. The moon is a clock. So what does that even mean? The moon is a clock. Well, think about it in terms of pattern recognition. For a nervous system that's been through trauma, the moon represents a collection of environmental data, the light, the time of night, the stress levels, that matches a past pattern of danger. It's not some magical pull. It's the system predicting, based on old data, that something terrible is about to happen, and then deploying its ultimate defense mechanism. Okay, now let's take this same lens and apply it to our second figure, the vampire. We all know the term energy vampire, right? We use it to describe people who just drain us. But is the vampire really just a lonely soul who needs some healing? Or is it a blueprint for something else entirely? And here, the difference between the two views gets even sharper. The whole wellness world often frames the vampire as this dark empath, a wounded soul that we can heal with our love and light. But the structural view, it's much, much harsher. It sees the vampire as a calcified personality structure, one that maps almost perfectly onto narcissism or antisocial personality disorder, and it's defined by one core trait, the absolute refusal of any and all limits. So let's get into the mechanics here. Why doesn't a vampire have a reflection? Structurally, it's not magic, it's a lack of something called object constancy, the inability to see yourself as a separate object among others, with your own flaws and limitations. And the darkness, it's not just a place to hide. It's a self-generated reality bubble where the vampire is the only author of truth. And sunlight? It's not some holy moral force. It's just objective reality breaking through that bubble. And that brings us to this really powerful term, ontological collision. This is what sunlight represents. It's that moment when a vampire's self-sealing, totally narcissistic reality bubble slams right into a world that it did not create and that it cannot control. A world where other people are real and the rules apply to everyone. The vampire doesn't burn because sunlight is good. It burns because its entire operating system crashes on contact with shared reality. So this raises a really serious question, especially for those of us who lean towards spiritual solutions. We often think that practices like seeking ego death or non-duality can help cure these states. But what if, for some people, spirituality becomes the ultimate escape route? So according to the structural argument, if you give a narcissist, someone whose core trait is refusing accountability, a philosophy that says the self is an illusion, you're not actually curing them. You might be arming them. They can weaponize non-duality to completely detach from the harm they cause. I mean, think about it. If I don't exist and you don't exist, then who is there to hold responsible? So, if the problems are so fundamentally different, the solutions must be too. And this brings us to the final showdown. How do you cure a monster? Do you integrate the shadow, or do you fix the machine? For the werewolf, the spiritual path is all about integration. You learn to live with the wolf. The structural path, though, it points to the legend of the silver bullet. And here, silver represents an elemental, undeniable, non-distortable truth. The cure isn't about fighting the wolf. It's about introducing a fact so real that the trauma's hypervigilant, distorted reality just collapses. It's about radical clarity. And for the vampire, the spiritual path is to send love and light. But the structural view warns that this is basically just providing narcissistic supply. You're just feeding the problem. The cure in this model is the wooden stake. Wood is organic, it decays, it represents mortality. To cure the vampire, you have to pierce its false self with the undeniable reality of dependence, loss, and death. So, where does all this leave us? We're kind of caught between these two really powerful ways of seeing our struggles. One gives us this beautiful poetic meaning, and the other gives us cold, mechanical precision. And the choice between them, well, it has real consequences for how we try to heal. At the end of the day, we have to remember a fundamental truth about ourselves. Humans are storytelling machines. Even if our problems are purely mechanical, we can really only interact with our inner world through some kind of narrative. We have to make meaning just to survive. And maybe that's the synthesis right there. Maybe the story we tell ourselves, the myth, the metaphor, is like the placebo that allows the real medicine of the mechanics to actually work. Maybe we need the poetry just to be able to tolerate the cold, hard facts of the machine. The poetry gives us hope, and the mechanics, they give us a target. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. A map shows you both where you are and the path out. A costume, it only changes how you look while you're still lost. So when you use these myths to understand yourself or someone else, ask yourself, does this story give me permission to stay in a broken state, or does it give me the clarity to actually repair it? Are you looking for a new costume to wear, or are you looking for a map to find your way out of the labyrinth?